Before Corona was the norm, there were rules to which we'd conform. But now, God knows, anything goes.
Meetings were a circumstance which required us wearing pants, but now who needs those? Anything goes.
If binging Netflix you like, vodka and tricks you like, if no alarm you like, if Fauci's charm you like, if hoarding you like, or Tiger King you like, Carol's guilty, God knows.
Back to working when the sluts up, but till then we'll dress our pets up and make them pose. Anything goes.
While on meetings over Zoom, I'm in fact watching Cat Ride Roomba dumb videos. Anything goes.
Parents now wax academics. We've gotta hate this pandemic. Anything goes.
We're in quarantine right now, cause no vaccine right now means we can't meet right now. What do we eat right now? Delivery men right now, pizza again right now.
God bless Domino's. So let's drink some quarantinis and chase them with bleach bellinis, cause hell, who knows? Anything goes.
I'll wear sweatpants today and sing to plants today and take their naps today and give no craps today. My hair is nuts today, cause no haircuts today mean sweet leg afros.
No performance, no rehearsal, no corsets, no speaking verse. I'll just speak in prose. Anything goes.
Theater suspension, so disease prevention, yo. Don't miss attention, no. What I might mention, though, it's all pretension, bro. It's like detention, oh, how I miss standing O's.
Life will just be so much sweeter when you're trapped inside our theater for 5-hour shows.
Anything goes.
What a year it has been, facing a challenge most certain to alter our future and community as we knew it. I think back to our time together at the 20th anniversary of this conference, which we held in person on March 5th, 2020, as over 350 of us gathered together to discuss what leadership legacy we would each leave. How has your leadership changed over this past year? What legacy have you left during this time of crisis? I also think about our 2018 conference keynote, Bob Johansen, from the Institute for the Future. His foresight that we'd soon be thriving in a future of extreme disruption and distributed everything seemed so foreign, so distant at the time. But this is exactly where we are today. If you haven't already read the new Leadership Literacies, I highly recommend it, or reread it. As he says in the book jacket, it's too late to catch up, but it's a great time to leapfrog. Over the past year, the nonprofit community has been leapfrogging by creating partnerships in unique ways, adapting delivery of services, innovating solutions that involve using new and increased use of technology, promoting and supporting remote work, and becoming more nimble with funding. Despite uncertainty that morphed in various ways daily and sometimes hourly, the nonprofit community stepped boldly toward the future and remains an anchor for our community. Our spirit is stronger than ever, despite our physical distance. Yet, we long to be together. We long to belong and feel like we are included. And this past year has been especially challenging. With the pandemic caused from COVID-19, coupled with the long-standing pandemic of racial injustice, we have an opportunity to leapfrog into the future of belonging. What does the future look like? How can we secure our future? That is why we chose the theme of belonging for this year's Securing the Future conference. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome each and every one of you to the 2021 Securing the Future conference, the future of belonging. My name is Jenny Berg, and as Executive Director of Leadership Council for Nonprofits, it's my privilege and honor and the mission of Leadership Council to help our nonprofits maximize their impact, develop their leaders, and strengthen the community through events like this. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for all that you do to secure the future of every individual and community you serve. Belonging is a basic, universal human need that pervades every arena of our lives. Over the next decade, loneliness, disconnection, disaffiliation, and exclusion are expected to be more pervasive, especially as we reinvent systems in our post-pandemic world. In many ways, the avenues for belonging have diminished or become hidden. Rather than resigning ourselves to a dark, lonely future, this session will highlight emerging disruptions that other opportunities to pioneer new approaches to find out the validation, support, safety, connection, and meaning that comes from belonging. Well, today you will learn how adopting the outside-in perspectives of futures thinking unlocks principles and potential practices for imagining the possible futures of belonging that can inform and influence work in collaboration with your employees, volunteers, clients, and constituents. Today's conference offers us an opportunity for all of us as leaders to take some time to look beyond our everyday roles, projects, and challenges and expand our minds. How should belonging show up in our board governance? How does it and how can it show up as we engage our communities in learning and leading community change? When we look internally at strategy and operations, is there a place for everyone? And of course, belonging is a critical piece of each of our own and our organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion journeys. This one-of-a-kind event is something the nonprofit community really looks forward to each and every year. This conference brings together nonprofit leaders, funders, board members, volunteers, and businesses to network, learn, challenge, inspire, and advance the community as a whole. In just a moment, we'll recognize our 2021 Leadership Legacy Award winners who are leading the way to transform our communities. The Leadership Council supports the nonprofit community by offering capacity-building leadership development programs for staff and boards. Through our Board Orientation and Leadership Development, better known as BOLD program, we are building a pipeline of motivated, educated, prepared, and connected board leaders who are ready to serve your organizations. If you are a BOLD alumni, please give a shout out in the chat. If your nonprofit is interested in allowing some of our BOLD class members to observe your board meeting, or if you'd like one of your nonprofit leaders or current board members to learn more through our BOLD class, our application process is open. Act now and join us to become a BOLD leader. Leadership Council has graduated 138 leaders who joined the 1,200 previous United Way of Greater Cincinnati BOLD grads, and we are in the midst of our BOLD 6 class, expecting to graduate 160 BOLD leaders in 2021. In addition to BOLD, another fast-growing program is our Leader Circle program. This past year, our Leaders Circles just exploded as more of our nonprofit leaders wanted to feel connected and included during these challenging times. Our Leaders Circles are leadership development safe, confidential spaces, which are virtual these days, where peers can connect, lean in, learn from, and help each other think through challenges and opportunities to help them grow as nonprofit leaders. This cycle starts in September and goes through May, and currently we have 140 leaders in 16 different circles. Registration will open up this June for our 2021 to 22 cycle. In addition to our leadership development programs, we offer other resources like a free job board to post your job openings, a compensation and benefits survey, no-cost retirement plans, group purchasing for office supplies, and more. You can find all of these opportunities to learn, save, connect, and grow on our leadershipcouncil.us website. The Leadership Legacy Awards were inaugurated in 2020 to shine a spotlight on a nonprofit organization and individual nonprofit leaders whose leadership has demonstrated great efforts to help secure the future of the organizations they serve and support, so these nonprofits can continue to help build and secure the future of every individual and community they serve. We are so excited to honor our recipients. And the award itself deserves a spotlight. This beautiful and unique piece of artwork has been designed and handmade by artists from the Inside Out studio. The awards were created specifically by Alfonso Rowe, Ashley Paris, Dwayne Sparks, and Steve Gall, When creating this award last year, Allison Davis was one of the co-designers and helped come up with the award based on her Securing the Future logo. Inside Out is a social enterprise of Inspiration Studios made possible with the support of the Butler County Board of Developmental Disabilities. They provide an opportunity for artists with disabilities to produce, market, and receive an income from their art while gaining confidence in their abilities. I highly encourage you to include Inside Out as you consider awards or custom artwork. Aren't these just so beautiful? Our first award is the Visionary Board Leader. This award honors an established and proven board member of a nonprofit organization in the greater Cincinnati region who has led their organization through transformational change, weathered difficult circumstances, and demonstrated outstanding vision and achievement. This year we had a tie and we are honoring two visionary leaders. First up is Deborah Alsop, Cincinnati Preschool Promise, Chair of the Governance Committee and former Secretary. Nominator Chara Jackson, Executive Director and CEO of Preschool Promise, praised Deborah's board leadership. Deborah understands and has strengthened the organization's collective voice in addressing the connection between internal governance and the achievement of intended outcomes. She assisted in raising the organization's visibility among Cincinnati's political and business leadership while bringing the voice of those not typically represented, Cincinnati Preschool Promise preschoolers, the city's youngest citizens. Deborah willingly introduces others and provides access to the city's senior leadership by extending her relationships to amplify Cincinnati Preschool Promise's collective voice in the community. Congratulations to Deborah Alsop.
Thank you so much, Leadership Council for Nonprofits, for this very heartwarming and prestigious award. For my work as a board member for Cincinnati Preschool Promise, it is a dream come true.
Next up is Tom Stoll, Board Chair of the Brighton Center. Tom provided a steady hand throughout the succession process, including the selection of the new CEO, and he continues that leadership today. As if this change were not transformational enough, he has also led the organization through COVID, which has had implications for service delivery, governance, donor relationships, fundraising, including the launch of their legacy campaign, and policies related to staff and communication strategies. Tom has remained calm, supportive, and made connections in all of these areas. He is supportive of agency leadership staff and listens to all perspectives. Throughout all of this, Tom has continued to lead our strategic plan forward and ensure families continue to have access to transformational programs. Wanda Winkler is the president and CEO and nominated Tom for this award. Congratulations to Tom Stoll.
Jenny, thank you very much. From the Leadership Council to Brighton Center, to be here to represent the efforts of everyone that works so hard. It has been quite a year of transition. You know what COVID means to everybody. For us at Brighton, it's been running to the front lines. The programs where our community needs us, where we got to be involved, to be able to be in the board chair seat in a year like this, just makes the heart feel good. Thank you so much for the award.
Our second award is called the VUCA Leader Award, which means Vision, Understanding, Clarity, and Agility. This award recognizes an early career leader in the greater Cincinnati nonprofit sector who is positively impacting their organization and the community through demonstrated vision, understanding, clarity, and agility in a VUCA, or a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. Jennifer Steele, CEO of Meals on Wheels, Southwest Ohio and Northern Kentucky, is our honoree. Board Chair Michael Murphy expounded on Jennifer's leadership. Upon Jennifer's arrival as CEO of Meals on Wheels of Southwest Ohio and Northern Kentucky, she began to restructure the executive leadership of the organization to reduce redundancies and better align with the mission and services provided. She installed expertise on logistics, compliance, fundraising, and innovation in roles that allowed for collaboration and improvement throughout the entire organization. This directly resulted in the following: a steady reduction of food waste through the reduction of repeat deliveries, due to clients not being home, an increase in hourly base pay for kitchen workers and drivers due to the increases in efficiency realized elsewhere, the ability to utilize the more than 600 volunteers that presented themselves as a result of the global pandemic while still maintaining a safe working environment through social distancing. This was accomplished through innovative uses of auto dialer systems allowing for volunteer work from home, as well as clever assignment of duties to those that live together in the same household, where social distancing is not required. Congratulations to Jennifer Steele.
It means so much to me to receive this award during such a quintessentially VUCA time. Thank you so much to the Leadership Council for this incredible honor.
Our final award is the Inclusive Culture Award. This award recognizes a nonprofit organization that is welcoming at every level to every individual. The Children's Home is the honoree. The engagement our organization has with every colleague within the agency, from the newest and most junior member up to and including our senior leadership, is a mindset of people first, mission always. And it permeates throughout the Children's Home from the top to the bottom and laterally. The Children's Home fosters a climate of diversity and inclusion on our staff and the governing board of trustees to best reflect the diverse community where we live and serve. The Children's Home was nominated by Dr. Stephen Wilson, Communications Director. Congratulations to the Children's Home.
On behalf of the 15,000 children that the Children's Home serves here in Greater Cincinnati and the Heights Center of Excellence, Best Point Behavioral Health, and Co-Stars, we accept this and we're humbled by the award we have received. On behalf of all of us, we say thank you very much. Thank you. Huh?
Leadership Council congratulates all of these 2021 Leadership Legacy Award winners. Our sponsors are true believers and supporters of the nonprofit sector in so many ways. Please join me in thanking our presenting sponsors, Flynn & Company, CPA and Business Consultants, Cincinnati Cares, and Movers and Makers. Our leader-level sponsors are the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, and our community-level sponsors, Ann Maxfield, LLC Consulting and Implementation, Ignite Philanthropy, and Unemployment Services Trust. And our supporter-level sponsors are the Community Action Agency and Warren County Community Services, Flywheel Social Enterprises, and our podcast partner is Talent Magnet Institute. Within the platform, you can visit the sponsors, learn more about their work and commitment to philanthropy, and set up a networking opportunity. Thank you. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to my Securing the Future committee members who so generously volunteered their time to help develop and execute this event. We always have a lot of fun coming up with a theme, reviewing the breakout proposals, and now thinking through the awards. It's harder to see the committee members and my Leadership Council team members, Jack, Jesse, Justin, Josh, and Sandy, but please know they have all contributed mightily to this conference and to the work of Leadership Council. I'd like to give them a virtual round of applause. And lastly, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my Leadership Council Board of Directors who are committed to meeting the needs of our Leadership Council members. Thank you very much to all these folks for all the work, ideas, and hard work. We are better because of you. You know, there are people that come into your life at just the right time, and Rick Flynn is one of those folks. Rick is the CEO of Flynn & Company CPA and Consultants, and he and I met in 2011 as we were both Leadership Cincinnati Class 35 participants. In 2012, I became Executive Director of Leadership Council and immediately connected to Rick as I knew of his strong support for the nonprofit community. Since then, Rick has signed on to be our Leaders Circle program sponsor, in addition to having been a favorite volunteer facilitator for several years. Flynn & Company has been a long-time Leadership Council sponsor, and this year he graciously volunteered to be our Securing the Future presenting sponsor. And of course, as a client of Flynn & Company, I trust and recommend him and his firm implicitly to do our Leadership Council accounting work. Flynn & Company is a full-service, certified public accounting and management consulting firm headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio. Founded in 1994, the firm is committed to assisting businesses and individuals in achieving financial success. Rick, thank you for being our presenting sponsor for our 2021 Securing the Future Conference and for introducing our exciting speaker.
Thanks, Jenny. We are so pleased to be a presenting sponsor of the Securing the Future Conference. Jenny has done a remarkable job in creating a much-needed resource for our nonprofit leaders. Flynn & Company has been a longtime supporter of the Leadership Council because we truly believe in the positive impact this organization makes. Their efforts extend well beyond the nonprofits that they serve. Flynn & Company specializes in audit, tax, and accounting services to nonprofits. Our firm has been asked on a number of occasions to facilitate strategic planning sessions for our nonprofit clients as well. We truly enjoy working with nonprofits because they do so much good in our community. And now I'd like to take this time to introduce our guest speaker, Vanessa Mason. Vanessa is the research director at the Institute for the Future, a 52-year-old nonprofit organization that helps individuals, organizations, and communities think systematically about the future. Her future research explores how we can redesign and reimagine health and well-being across business, social, and civic spheres. Her newsletter, Future of Belonging, explores how we can redesign tools and remodel approaches to fulfill the basic human need for belonging over the next decade as loneliness, alienation, and exclusion have become more pervasive. Throughout her career, she has worked to design and scale products, services, experiences, and communities that improve health. Prior to IFTF, Vanessa's consultancy, Riveted Partners, accelerated digital health innovation by working at the intersection of inclusive design and product and business strategy. She led product development for Zero Divide's portfolio of digital health pilots focused on reducing health disparities. Vanessa fostered talent acquisition and investment opportunities through InHealth, a community of female digital health innovators at Rock Health, a digital health incubator. She also managed global health service design initiatives in Mozambique, Argentina, and Brazil, and supported mobile health product development for clients in West and East Africa. Vanessa has written for and has been quoted in several media outlets, including NPR and Fast Company. She has been recognized as a 2018 Aspen Ideas Festival Spotlight Health Scholar, 40 Under 40 Tech Diversity Silicon Valley, 2016 New Leaders Council San Francisco Fellow, 200 Black Women in Tech to Follow on Twitter, and as a 2016 TED Med Research Scholar. Vanessa earned her BA in Psychology from Yale University and her MPH in Global Health from Columbia University.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to talk to you today about the future of belonging in the age of omnicrisis. Now, I'm sure many of you are wondering, what does omnicrisis mean? Well, first, let's start with a crisis. When you think of a crisis, it might look something like this: an insurrection at the seat of American government. Usually we think of crises as something like a catastrophic event. It's time and it's space bound. But what I want to offer is a different way to visualize crisis. This is an original cartoon by Graham McKay, a Canadian cartoonist. It was published on March 11th, 2020, the day that the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic. It was intended to capture the enormity of the current crisis we've lived in since nearly a year now. COVID crisis with a looming recession behind it. Now, of course, like all things that are available on the internet, people have remixed and redesigned it, and a meme was born. This version emerged by mid-June, really capturing what I mean by what it means to live in an omnicrisis. Cataclysmic catastrophe awaits around every corner. It pervades every aspect of life. Oftentimes you have crises occurring and cascading simultaneously upon each other. I'm from Houston, arguably the first American city really in the age of omnicrisis. In a tweet that I found, someone said, "I don't think people outside Houston really grasp what the city has gone through since 2015 or 2016. We've been bouncing just from one disaster to another, and it has impacted everyone, some absolutely more than others, millions of people all told. It's truly exhausting." In case you weren't aware of some of the disasters that Houston has gone through, some of the crises, here's merely a short list in the last 5 to 6 years. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, chemical fires, Hurricane Harvey, the tax day floods, which were, again, once in 500-year floods, and so many more. A major American city, the fourth largest in the United States, simply never getting out of a period of recovery because crisis just keeps emerging. So in our age of omnicrisis, it's more important than ever to practice strategic foresight, often called futures thinking, because if we're living in an age of omnicrisis where everything is completely volatile and turned upside down, we are going to be in conditions of uncertainty. And unfortunately, those conditions of uncertainty are becoming our new normal. Now, historically, foresight has been practiced by the military, corporations, and academics, but it doesn't have to be limited to those institutions. Engaging in imagination is a human right, and wondering and planning for the future are core to being human. I want all of you today, and hopefully all of your constituents who you're working with, to know that everyone needs to participate in these conversations and decisions about the future. We all need to understand how to systematically think about the future so we shape a future where we all belong. Now, these quotes really begin to capture just what exactly it is when we're talking about futures thinking. It's not just about, again, sort of technology. We really need to understand the social and personal implications of the future. And from our executive director at Institute for the Future, she has said, "Envisioning and making the future must be a massively public endeavor." So again, this is something that's a powerful intervention for individuals, families, and communities. We really just want to say that this is the moment for bringing futures front and center in your work, in your organization, in this pivotal moment in our present history. And to say that it's different from strategic planning. We're really looking at a longer term horizon. Of course, many of you might be engaged in strategic thinking maybe now or have before in the past, probably more in a 2 to 3 year time horizon. Really looking at maybe financial analysis, very quantitative. With futures thinking, we are really focused on more of a 10 to 20 year time horizon. We're adopting a greater systems focus. So trying to take a step back and take in the sort of both the long view and the broader view. And because of that, we're integrating multiple voices and sources of expertise. At IFTF, we capture this in our Foresight Insight Action Cycle. We prepare by gathering our building block evidence, our signals and drivers, and framing our futures questions. We use foresight to generate meaningful implications from the evidence that we've gathered, creating plausible, compelling, provocative narratives and visions of multiple futures. And from there, move to insights, that aha moment where you can't turn back, eventually to be able to prioritize and frame and take actions towards the future that we would prefer to have. So today I'm going to share some research done by Institute for the Future, as well as myself and my newsletter, Future Belonging, really to both inspire your thinking about what could belonging look like over the next decade, and hopefully inspire you to take actions in the present to build better futures. But first, before we race to the future, let's start with this question of how did we get to where we are today? It's helpful to think of pandemics as socio-epidemiological events. From evolutionary biology, we know that viruses and parasites and all sorts of microbes are very innovative. They're constantly looking for weaknesses and opportunities in the immune systems of organizations to be able to propagate. And because of this, as we've seen now in the news, we have a number of different variants of COVID-19. This biological vector actually is very skilled at finding weaknesses in our society's immune system or social vulnerabilities to propagate and wreak havoc in the process. So in this sense, the pandemic is revealing weaknesses in our social immune system that we were ignoring before, or that we covered up, or that we tried to minimize. And now we've reached a point where we can't ignore them anymore. Now with futures, we often look back to history because it's really helpful both to see where we've come from and also just a reminder that many times things aren't necessarily new. This is a sign from an anti-mask leak in San Francisco from the last major global pandemic that we had. And it's just a reminder that even as we look to the challenges ahead, sometimes it can be heartening to say that we've overcome many of these challenges before, and we have the opportunity to do that in the future, even as we look ahead to untold and unknown crises. Now, today's crisis comes from these multiple systems failures outlined here that are part of our research after the pandemic. What happens next? I'm sure that any of you have engaged in, I'm sure, the really wonderful nonprofit work that you've been doing so far. Many of these are known to you, but I'm presenting them not to say that they are new, but rather quite the opposite, to give context and just show the interconnectedness of all of these broken systems, and how, again, having this sort of backdrop or landscape of crisis and brokenness, that this is going to be what we're working with going forward. And so we really need to take both bold steps and often consider the complexity of what we have going ahead. So these are some cards that just really go into more of the sort of data behind those 7 broken health systems from our research. But I want to shift to belonging to talk about what are some of the other forces that got us to our moment in time where we are with belonging today. So I oftentimes cite these 3 factors or future forces that are shaping belonging and have shaped it in the past and in the present and into the future. One is loneliness. I'm sure many of you have seen headlines about the loneliness epidemic in this country, that more people feel lonelier than ever before, which is true. And with the pandemic, it has certainly gotten somewhat worse. What I also want to outline too is that this isn't just about a lack of relationships. People also report not having quality relationships. They don't feel that their relationships are meaningful, that they have people that they can be themselves around and truly relate to. This is all encompassing of what I'm referring to as loneliness, that we don't feel like we have people around us that really know us and see us and allow us to be ourselves. Disaffiliation is encompassing a lot of the kind of institutions and clubs that we belong to. So historically, Americans have belonged to social institutions like churches and houses of worship, social clubs like the Elks, Key Club, Rotary, which certainly are still active today, but not nearly at the scale that they have been in past history. Also, I think not accidentally, we've seen a decline in trust in a lot of our other institutions like government and media. And it's this sort of shift away from being tied to institutions, to belonging to institutions, to finding quality relationships in those institutions, that again is a second future force really shaping belonging. And the third one, really around displacement. Of course, with economic mobility comes physical mobility. I'm a millennial. Millennials certainly generally at a certain class live in major cities because they're trying to pursue better jobs. And so there's certainly a lot more economic mobility in this country. I also want to turn to the economic mobility that might be happening in a downward scale, that with gentrification in neighborhoods comes people getting displaced out of neighborhoods where they've been potentially for generations, thereby changing the community and sort of social fabric of those communities. There's also displacement due, again, of course, to climate, that with the, for example, wildfires in California, or maybe flooding due to hurricanes, that people leave their homes and they don't return, which of course changes their sort of own relationships that they might have, as well as, again, the community relationships that they have around it. So it's these 3 forces that I want to share with you today that kind of seem maybe presenting a more pessimistic future of belonging. But what I really want to challenge us today is to think about what are some positive arenas, some positive approaches and new ways that people are seeking belonging, creating belonging, that really are counterbalancing some of these. So where do we go next? Well, before we head too far down and looking at the future of belonging, I want to share with you these three components of belonging. The first is safety and comfort. Keep in mind that for belonging, you need both physical safety, of course, but you also need psychological safety and comfort for people to fully participate and fully be themselves. So I'm going to get into some of the ways in which by cultivating belonging, we can also build resilience for our age of omnicrisis ahead. And looking at safety and comfort, we're going to look at some of the resilient resources that are exploring new ways to secure safety in an era of perpetual trauma. The second component is really around emotional connection. That, of course, affection for others, but also that external validation and witnessing that comes from having people around us that we like, who we respect, who also see us and see what we're doing and what we're trying to do and say that we are good and that they feel comfortable around us. So with emotional connection, we're really going to explore resilient relationships, the networks, the infrastructure that really unlock relationships of care and connection. And last, but certainly not least, belonging, this third component of meaning and sense making, that this is a vehicle for uncovering meaning amid the chaos and uncertainty that we have lying ahead in our age of omnicrisis. And with this, I'm going to share some about resilient systems that are investigating new avenues for meaning making that can restore and regenerate well-being. So let's get started with resilient resources. I'm going to share a few what we call signals to watch. So these are small or local innovations or disruptions that if they were to scale have the potential to really change things. And again, when we're talking about resilient resources, we're really focused on that safety and comfort. And specifically, one, fostering that connection to self, really having people feel comfortable with who they are, being themselves. And some of the signals in this are really getting into more trauma-informed practices and more trauma-informed ways of thinking and being that really can provide that safe space for connection to self. And also fostering safe spaces, safe places, like what are the new institutions and commons? And I'm going to share some signals of those as well. So first up is this app called Evermore that really looks at they're touting their trainable AI that allows young people to share their stories. And it's kind of interesting because young people are able to kind of share sort of mini journal entries. And what happens with the AI system that they have built is that they're able to kind of, in a sense, analyze those stories and kind of act as a slightly older, maybe sibling or sort of an older, wiser version of themselves to provide virtual mentorship to students. So in a sense, it's almost like hearing from yourself if you had already been through these things before, kind of seeing the substance underneath the stories that you are sharing. Truly an interesting way of getting to know yourself better through the stories that you share with technology. Another signal that's really interesting in this is a company called Koa. They really focused on building emotional fitness, but not just building emotional fitness in a sort of, let's do solitary exercises, but building emotional fitness through community. Their mission is to create a culture that celebrates mental well-being. So before the pandemic, they would oftentimes have a lot of events where people were able to sort of share their vulnerabilities and work to become better founders, better sort of professionals, just better versions again of themselves. And it certainly translated that into community and this ability to kind of act as a gym for your mental health in that sense and train you to be more emotionally healthy and fit. And this last signal around resilient resources, in case you're not familiar with this, Callisto is a really interesting social enterprise that is focused on helping victims of sexual assault. And specifically what is so intriguing about them is that they're leveraging data networks and crowdsource supporting to provide what they call matching. So in the app that they have, basically the app is often used by students on colleges and universities. And so when women experience these incidents, they can choose to anonymously report to the app. And then the app on the back end is looking through those incidents for commonalities, basically to find repeat offenders. You can kind of think of this as a way of networking safety. You've taken the burden in a certain sense of victims of these violent crimes, but you're also able to sort of see and investigate without their involvement. And if the app finds a match, then they alert university authorities that they have found this match in an effort to find these repeat offenders. So it's an interesting way, again, of using technology to help people feel safe. So to close out this section on resilient resources, here's a few questions that I want to offer as insight starters. One, I want to remind you that emotional fitness isn't just about grit. Again, we're looking at an age of omnicrisis where there's just going to be a lot of trauma and volatility and disruption. And we aren't going to be able to get through it simply by sort of gritting our teeth and moving through. We need to be able to feel the emotions, the sort of full range of those emotions, and know how to both live with that and move through it. So how can you foster your personal emotional fitness and the emotional fitness of others? And then with that close to example, what are ways in which your organization can really begin to catalyze network safety? Knowing that there's so many more sort of risks and threats ahead, what are ways that you can do that both at scale and without putting the burden on vulnerable individuals and vulnerable communities who are already having to handle so much? So next up, we have resilient relationships. So resilient relationships are all about our emotional connections and emotional bonds. But it's also a lot about how those are constructed and how they're put together. So I'm going to be exploring and showing new ways of thinking about data, not really as sort of cold and objective, but how we can think of data as warm and being able to drive equity. And really exploring this notion of what is our care infrastructure. So New Public is an organization that recently published a framework for creating flourishing, inclusive digital spaces. It was the output of 2 years of research that they did, really looking at in-person public spaces and trying to understand the attributes and sort of components of what make public spaces really wonderful for people to be in. This framework that they've created, Welcome, Understand, Act, and Connect, is really about trying to help people understand in our digital worlds too, how we can have public spaces that are also welcoming and inclusive. And so a few things to note of what is really interesting about the notion of digital public spaces. And in case you're not, it's kind of hard for you to ground this, you can think of, of course, public spaces like parks, libraries, certainly our in-person public spaces. In our digital world and on digital platforms, of course, we don't really have those. Our lives exist through the lens of social media, through media networks, and we don't really have sort of places where we kind of bump into and have the ability to build relationships with strangers. So one is that New Public has this interesting perspective that it's important to think through the lines of spaces because spaces shape relationships. This isn't just about information exchange that you might see, again, on the social media network, but rather how can we get to know each other better? Secondly, that they're kind of adopting a lot, if you haven't heard the official World Health Organization definition of health, that much the same, that health isn't about the absence of illness, but rather this sort of affirmative, positive sense of being. And they think that digital public spaces should be the same. How can they not just be about the absence of harm, but rather something that help us to be healthier, that help us to be more connected, and ultimately in a sort of more positive and affirmative way. And the third piece that I think is so wonderful, and again, going back to that point about history, is that they're affirming that a lot of the challenges that come with building flourishing, inclusive spaces are not new. And that for kind of the entire course of humanity, we've been experimenting with how to design public spaces to help strangers get along. And so while, of course, it is important to look at this through the lens of technology and thinking about how we can design technology to do that, we certainly, one, have a lot of wisdom to draw upon from other disciplines. And two, it's also a recognition of the challenge ahead, that this is something that we've been working on for decades, for centuries, and we still haven't quite mastered it yet. And so it's important to adjust our expectations accordingly. The second signal, if you haven't heard of this, is a podcast called Teenager Therapy. And it's almost exactly what it sounds like. A group of 5 teens out in California decided to create a podcast really to have frank, vulnerable conversations about the things that matter to them. Friendships, relationships, stress, mental health. I love the headline that they have on the icon, because we have problems too. And what's really interesting about this, of course, is that, it's peer-to-peer. It's about them relating to each other. It's not really about this notion of expertise. Like, they don't have PhDs. They're not formal psychologists. Sometimes they have interviews where they have folks come on to hear from. But a lot of times it's just them talking amongst themselves and also responding to all the comments that they're getting from other teenagers. And it's just both this openness and this desire to want to engage with people through this medium of sound that is just so incredibly interesting. Again, providing these spaces and opportunities to really focus on how can we learn from each other, how can we connect from each other, how can we see each other and affirm that maybe the struggles that we're going through, we're not going through them alone, and that other people have made it through these challenges as well. And this last signal is a company called Medley. Medley calls themselves a membership for curious, growth-minded people who want a structured, social, and accessible way to invest in themselves. Now, they're selling to employers, but what I think is so incredibly interesting about Medley is, again, this headline that you see here from the front page of their site, that this is a group in service of the individual. It's an opportunity to deliver self-actualization and lifelong learning, precisely because you're bringing dissimilar people together to embark on this exploration together. So by going on a journey together, each one of them individually grow, not just in their jobs, which certainly is valuable. And of course, as I said, they're selling to employers, so that's really what employers are looking for, but also that they're growing as people, facilitated by a coach leading these relationships. And so it's just an interesting way of thinking about when you're bringing groups together, what are you bringing them together for? Who's part of these groups, and how can you do this in a way that isn't necessarily kind of on a single track of what's aimed to achieve, but rather that they can grow as people, both individually and as a collective group together as well. So to close out this section, here's a few more insight starters for you to think about. What is your organization's care infrastructure? Do you have the ability to have safe spaces for people to talk about stress and mental health challenges? Are you able to kind of set up, welcoming, flourishing sort of public spaces or digital spaces for your employees, for maybe your stakeholders and other community members that you're working with? And then the second question of, where can you prioritize the relational over the transactional? I think a lot of times, especially when we get in nonprofit work, we're really focused on, we have to deliver for the grant. We have to deliver because the budget is doing these certain things. And of course, that is all certainly important, but I don't want us to lose sight of that we're all people at the end of the day, and we need to be able to kind of understand how can we build our relationships, because it's really where the strength that we're going to come from to get through crises at the end of the day. A lot of what is so remarkable about the city of Houston, if you weren't from there, it's all Hurricane Harvey, and honestly, all the crises they've been going through, is that, the motto of Houston Strong, about people helping other people and going through extraordinary lengths to do so, honestly has been one of the only ways that they've been able to get through this constant period of crisis. And so I really want to encourage you to learn to lead with relationship, because these are our true source of strength. And really focus on how you can build relationships with everyone, both within your organization and outside of it, that are upholding dignity and agency, again, to sort of honor people and move forward together in strength. Last up, we have our resilient systems. So these systems are the narratives, the culture, the ways in which we have spaces and vehicles for meaning and sense making. I really want to talk a bit about legacy, because I think it's really, especially as we're talking about resilience and systems and nonprofit, socially driven organizations, legacy is just so incredibly important. And thinking about legacy and how you're contributing to systems around you in positive ways through people, through the practices and the sort of the products and services that you are offering. So one signal to watch at this is Deep Time Walk, which is a UK-based social enterprise. And it's, if you aren't familiar with this, it's super interesting, but basically it's a group of scientists as well as creatives who've come together to build what they call a Deep Time Walk. So it's a 4.6 kilometer walk. And the reason why I state this distance, it's very specific because it's calibrated to the age of the Earth. Basically, you're able to listen to an audio narration of the sort of science and the sort of evolution behind how the Earth's natural environment has changed over time. It's a way of experiencing this notion of deep time, of the millions of years that have occurred for the Earth's history. And it's also really interesting that it's not just about kind of learning the Earth's history, but it's this embodied experience that you are walking and experiencing sort of each epoch of history with every step that you're taking. Well, one, this is about kind of learning, of course, about natural systems. But the second piece of it is really to, of course, catalyze climate action and help people better connect with the natural world. They really encourage you and have done a lot of deep thinking about how this app is designed. You don't have to have internet. There's a lot of communication about how if you have constraints around mobility, that there are ways to experience deep time walk without actually having to physically walk and still have some elements of that embodied experience. And so it's that sort of attention to thinking about the sort of deepness of connection to out like your broader environment, thinking of your broader connection to time and to space, that I think is just so incredibly intriguing in a wonderful way to sort of rethink how we conceptualize of systems, that they aren't just about, you know, the sort of networks that we might be part of for our organizations or networks for our communities, but really sort of more somewhat philosophical notions of time and space as well. Another signal to watch is an organization called Sacred Design Lab. Now, if you aren't familiar with them, seeing this headline of a soul-centered research and development lab might sound kind of odd. But Sacred Design Lab is kind of interesting because they use a lot of language of faith and church really to explore how you design spaces, how you design practices, and especially what they specifically call out designing rituals in places where you may not find things like spirituality and rituals. So in their case, oftentimes it's in the workplace. Now, they aren't trying to literally infuse religion into workplace, but what ultimately Sacred Design Lab is trying to do is that it's trying to pursue that last piece that I talked to you about, meaning and sense making. It's saying that we as humans have a need to have meaning, to seek meaning, and then they want that ability for people to find meaning in spaces like their workplace that they used to derive from religious institutions like churches, temples, and mosques. Really addressing that fact that, like, as people have begun to disaffiliate from churches and religions, maybe for disagreeing with dogma or disagreeing with sort of the practices of how those institutions have behaved in other arenas, that nevertheless the sort of meaning making and sense making that religion provides, is that need is unmet. And so trying to find ways of doing that in secular spaces is really the focus of Sacred Design Lab. And so a lot of times they'll call themselves kind of divinity or spiritual consultants, but they're really trying to infuse meaning making practices and spiritual practices in secular spaces. So Project Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations is really focused on building a people-powered, intersectional mass movement focused on confronting our history of inequality in this country and really trying to build a diverse, again, mass movement of people across immigration, indigenous rights, LGBTQ, feminist, and economic justice movements, to address the history of inequality and its present effect as well, and begin to collectively come together to build a future where everyone belongs. So they really talk about healing both our relationships and our democracy. And so, if you're familiar with the history of countries like South Africa, they went through a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This is definitely drawing from that same cloth. But it's an attention to that it's not just enough to deal with this, maybe the sort of individual harms or even a community level harms, that as a whole, as a nation, that we need to really systematically think about and also systematically address the ways in which inequality has infused all of our systems and provide solutions that rise to that systemic level as well. So to close out this section with our insight starter, one, really thinking about how does your organization positively contribute to the systems around it, through your people, through your practices, your products and services. And specifically, I want to call out not just thinking about what necessarily you might be doing that is new, but really taking some time and space to think about what do you need to maybe do less of, or what do you need to unlearn from the inequitable systems that we are currently situated in. A lot of times there's, of course, a rush to want to sort of do things, but a lot of times maybe we need to spend more time thinking about what are things that we don't need to do and where can we sort of work toward obsolescence in things that we're doing, kind of reorient ourselves to better contribute to the systems around us. And speaking of reorientation, how might a reorientation towards building legacy and really thinking about how you care for your descendants, having that bigger notion of deep time in your work, really change what you do? So these scenarios came out of our post-pandemic work that are really encapsulating kind of what are some of the opportunities or sort of maybe even more broadly challenges that we have ahead of us. But I really want to shift to, now that we've sort of looked at some of the foresight, really around action and specifically thinking about transformation. So in our after the pandemic scenario, social solidarity was our transformation scenario that was focusing really on how we value social well-being, how we're leveraging mutuality. So how are we helping each other, relating to each other? And so I really want to encourage all of us, and myself included, to turn to transformation, because it's really what this moment of our present calls for, radically rethinking and radically redesigning the ways in which we move forward. So if you're not familiar with mutualism, here are a few of the key principles that are part of that practice. One thing to note, that why we've really been focusing on the transformation piece of this, is that one, it's a point of inspiration to think about how can we sort of radically redesign the work that we're doing, and bringing more of you into futures work and seeing how it's important. It's really clear through this research that a lot of futures thinking is seen as a luxury, and as I've seen before, collective imagination and futures thinking is a right. There's maybe a tendency to think that there's not the time to participate in this. And so I am committed, and the Institute for the Future is really committed to changing who participates in conversations about the future. We think that it's critically important that everyone, but especially those who are currently struggling in today's current social and economic conditions and inequalities, have the opportunity to examine these larger systems and be able to imagine ways in which the world can be different. So to sum up, here are the insight starters across the three arenas that I described today: are resilient resources, resilient relationships, and resilient systems. Resilient resources, really looking at emotional fitness and how you can build that in yourself and in others. Resilient relationships, where can you prioritize the relational over the transactional and really begin to build a more robust care infrastructure. And our resilient systems, what can we and what do we need to unlearn from the inequitable systems that we're in, and really begin to work towards obsolescence and some practices that might be upholding those inequitable systems themselves. So one way that you can put this into practice is looking at the toolkit that we've released for after the pandemic scenarios. There are an entire set of tools for a call to action to really begin to build a better future, a number of different toolkit cards. You can use these together with folks within your organizations and your constituents to really begin to explore and catalyze a reimagining of the future for a number of different actions. So you can use the scenarios as a first step to engage with futures work, the sort of longer narratives of what the future could hold. Bring in more people into these conversations about the future, and what we're really hoping for is to embed futures thinking in civic society, in the social sector, so that it becomes something that's not just a nice to have or a luxury, but something that is core to the work that you do. Something that I've often said a lot of times in my work, that if you're engaged in any kind of social change or social impact work, you are necessarily a futurist, because you are already imagining that the world can be different. And hopefully by looking at this toolkit, this is just an opportunity for you to have more tools to be able to do the wonderful work that you are already doing. So with that, I want to close. Thank you so much for attending this event. Hopefully I've given you a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to talk about, but most importantly, a lot of things for you to act upon to build a better future. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I was just reading through the questions and comments that all of you have. And I wanted to start with the question that Noon posed earlier about the use of AI and apps and their impact on loneliness. Thank you for asking that. I think it's really an interesting one to pose. I think someone in the chat actually addressed this, but for the most part, what you can think of as AI as a tool. I think a lot of times people try to say that technology is neutral. I don't think that's true, because we as people are not truly neutral. But what is relevant is that the use of AI and the use of apps, how they are used, the context that they are used in, the sort of questions or answers or the questions and sort of challenges that those things are trying to solve can be vehicles for inclusion for people. And so when we especially think about even concepts like digital safe spaces and thinking about things like AI, like the ability to teenagers to feel like they have someone who they can talk to, who they feel like is wise, even if it is in more of a kind of chat bot or kind of an AI, a trainable AI sort of format, is a good thing. You can also say that could be the opposite, that the sort of flywheel like of engagement of social media and getting people to kind of rage comment and rage share certainly can promote more negative effects as well. So with all of these things, it's about the attention that you're bringing to the use of it, kind of how is it designed? Again, that question that I had around the relational over the transactional, the reason why a lot of our social media platforms maybe don't bring that richness to our lives and that positivity and inclusion, and that they're prioritizing the transaction of getting data generated for the purposes of selling ads. There's certainly digital public spaces or just spaces that people have that are prioritizing people connecting with each other. I think I saw a comment from someone else, just a lot of conversation about Clubhouse. I really appreciate that. I joined Clubhouse a few months ago, and it is definitely overwhelming. So that sense of like protecting your sanity and kind of that always on, I think someone said that immense like have to be there feeling. Again, that's part of, at least in a digital public space sense of things being really confined to a business model that is prioritizing data and transactions and extraction for the purposes of profit. But one of the intriguing things that I find about this concept of digital public spaces and digital commons is that it does bring that sense of ease and experience and just meandering that we have, that if you were walking in a park or if you were just perusing for books at the library, we can have those same kind of experiences online as well, but we need to think of how we would craft those. A lot of times when I talk about belonging, because we have the sort of three components of it, the kind of safety and comfort, the emotional connection, and the meaning and sense making, is that this reminder that belonging doesn't happen by accident, it happens by design. And because of that, we need to be very conscious and intentional of the design of relationship, the design of things, the design of our systems in such a way that we are actually trying to foster and cultivate belonging. And so, I think that that's certainly possible with technology to do that kind of cultivation. But I think someone else also in the chat too is noting, it's about the combination of these things. Technology is not a substitute, but it can be an enabler, it can be a facilitator, it can be an accelerator. But really what we want to do is find spaces where technology can perform those kind of roles, but also take a look at ourselves as people and as humans and really focus on, well, what is it that we need to, as humans, really understand about our own biases, our own assumption. And again, that sort of last piece around meaning and sense making. What is it that we need to unlearn as individuals? What is it that we need to unlearn as organizations? And what is it that we need to unlearn as society? Someone definitely pointed out systemic racism, like that's a major part of it. Certainly those 7 systems that I showed at the beginning from our after the pandemic research, certainly that is one of the 7, and certainly arguably one that infuses all of the others, all of our political systems, our economic systems, certainly our social sort of values and norms that we act upon as well. And so I think by, sort of keeping that systems view in mind, it really helps us to understand those points of interconnection and therefore those points of fragility when it comes to changing our systems. It's not enough to just think about, well, if I just fix this one thing, that sort of the work is done. A lot of it is interconnected and self-reinforcing. And so I don't want this to be daunting. A lot of what I shared with the podcast that I did before this is that I want people to focus on, yes, the interconnectedness makes this challenging because it becomes self-reinforcing. reinforcing that, addressing inequity and a lack of belonging in certain spaces kind of causes it to sort of roll over somewhere else where it maybe becomes worse or becomes more entrenched. But I think precisely because of that interconnectedness, we all have this opportunity to kind of create virtuous cycles. So in the decisions that we make, the ways in which we build and constitute our organizations, the ways that we interact with others, how we choose to build and foster our healthy communities, all can create virtual cycles of belonging moving forward, and kind of like those positive cascades. So less of this sort of destructive tidal wave and more of the sort of ability to have positivity accelerate dramatically. Going back into chat. So yes, I was just speaking with Jenny, so all of you will have access to the slides. I always realize there's a lot of information included in these things. So you'll be able to take a deeper look at this. All right. There's a question about traditional faith-based groups. So yes, so some of this is, there's a move away from faith-based groups that certainly has a generational effect. So millennials, Generation Z, definitely, from a total sense are less affiliated with houses of worship and religion. And yes, thank you for mentioning Pew Research Center. There's some anecdotal evidence that, of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic, that has slowed a little bit as people are moving through crisis. I think kind of on an intuitive human level, we see that to be true. The second thing to think about is that I think that even as the membership, maybe from a traditional religious institution, might be dropping, again, people are still seeking that community and sense making and meaning making in secular spaces. One of the heads of the Secular Design Lab, Casper ter Kuile, is just a really amazing figure, but he hosts a podcast that I'm not going to get the exact text, but it's basically looking at Harry Potter as a sacred text. And a lot of that podcast is just taking us this premise that we don't have to have these sort of books and text handed down from the mountaintop. We can engage with literature in such a way that we are looking for sort of the values and the culture and the transformation, and doing that together with other people. We can do that in secular ways without necessarily having to have the physical building of a church, the institution of an organized religion. And so I think it's less of people maybe moving away from faith and people moving away from maybe faith institutions is what I want you to keep in mind. There certainly have been a groundswell over a number of years of secular churches. Like, people are choosing to go to church, but it's kind of without the God in church. It's sacrilegious. And so it's just a really interesting example of the ways in which that this is something that people crave, that they're looking for, even as you see, and of course, all of the sort of popularity of things like astrology and crystals and all the sort of like search for spirituality in a lot of places. Soul Cycle, this is the literal name of Soul Cycle, that people, it feels like going to church by being in this fitness studio. So people are looking for that transcendence in a lot of places. The thing that I'm cautious about is that a lot of times it's showing up in commercial capitalist sort of pay for your transcendence kind of spaces. And so I'm curious to see as people, especially now in pandemic times, and sort of looking for other arenas. I love this comment that someone said that the arts are church. Yes, certainly art and creativity and sort of these like very generative, imaginative spaces can be maybe non-commercial spaces to find this transcendence that we're craving. So I'm really intrigued about that. Let's see. Do you find that there's anything uniquely American about the crisis of belonging, or something we as a country need to unlearn in particular, or has it played out similarly in other countries? I do think that our particular crisis is a uniquely American crisis. I do think that the crisis of belonging is one that is pervasive everywhere. It's just the manifestations of it are different. the piece about like the sort of three forces that I named in the beginning, loneliness and disaffiliation and displacement, are still happening everywhere. There's a loneliness epidemic in all sorts of countries that has been noted through data and tracked over time. So much so that even the United Kingdom actually launched a ministry of loneliness. So they have someone that kind of is like a cabinet level, equivalent cabinet level position in the United Kingdom that's focused on dealing with the loneliness epidemic in the United Kingdom. I know that, I've seen like a lot of interesting signals, like countries like Sweden, like apparently Stockholm is one of the loneliest cities in the world. So those forces of kind of like loneliness are everywhere. The disaffiliation piece looks different in other countries. The sort of the social club history of America, I think, is something that's odd and unique. In a lot of other places, especially if you're thinking about kind of Western Europe, those institutions were tied to property ownership and aristocracy. So the sort of dynamics of disaffiliation operate somewhat differently. But if you look in the sort of generational effects on kind of loneliness and what young people are doing and where they're able to be, some of the same dynamics are still at play. And then certainly displacement, climate change is happening everywhere, but not to the same degree. So that physical displacement is still pervasive everywhere. The economic sort of mobility and displacement is still everywhere. But that piece is something that I think is just part of being human, that we're all figuring out in our present day. And then as specifically in terms of as a country that we need to unlearn, I think, systemic racism is the cross that we have to bear as Americans. Like, this country was founded on systemic racism. It's a country that has grown with systemic racism embedded. It is a country now that today is moving through that, the sort of, I don't want to say necessarily death throes, because I do think that, that there's a lot of reasons as to why we see it becoming even more entrenched today. And so I think the unlearning is that we need to decide to stop we need to stop ignoring what it is. And that's why I really like the Project Truth and Reconciliation Commission signal, and that they're trying to help us as Americans and as a social movement have that reckoning that other countries have had when they've had these more terrible social histories. Certainly Germany had its own reckoning after the Holocaust. Japan, to a certain degree, after its behavior in World War II and sort of the treatment of within China and South Korea, maybe not to the same degree as Germany. South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So there are ways in which countries have been able to, at least at a country level, start to have those sort of recognition, acknowledgement, and to some degree that kind of social and societal both forgiveness, as well as moving forward, acknowledging that this is something that they're always going to have to sort of work through. We have not had that in this country, and I think that's a uniquely American thing that we need to unlearn, to be upfront about. Yes, and I agree too that the overworked nature of America certainly helps this go forward. I remember being at an event actually in Greece, not last year, but the year before last, and I was meeting with someone who works in conflict resolution, and he was so perplexed because he said, everything that I've ever learned and done has told me that the United States is a country that should have erupted by now, given the sort of this duress that people have been living under, the economic duress, the sort of social sort of disconnection, and a lot of what we've seen with sort of political issues, where seeming like leaders don't really care about the health of people. And one of my responses is that people simply are too busy trying to attend to their basic needs through work to be able to do some of this. And so I think that's partly why we're seeing a lot of social interest in this, is that the pandemic has created space and a break in that sort of propensity to work so much. Let's see. Yes, Lisa, your question. Could you give us all one major takeaway as we head back into our digital spaces and our work to make our communities more connected and strong? one takeaway. I think that the framework that the public has provided, I really like, because it's very simple in terms of moving through. So the sort of welcome, connect, understand, and act. And so I think the one major takeaway is to think about what is your welcome to people, sort of what is your sort of front door within your digital spaces and within your communities. Who is welcome in the spaces that you have, to connect, like who's able to make connections, who's not able to make connections, what kinds of connections are they able to make, what is the sort of collective understanding. There's another person I follow who does a lot of community building in digital spaces, and she talks a lot about, like, when we come together, what is it that we can do together that we couldn't do separately? And so I think taking a step back and saying, you know, where could you be more connected with people, and do something collectively more together. And then last piece of what I want to underline too for all of you is that take action, even if it isn't the perfect step. What is it, something that you can do today and try and do together, and learn from, and then start this process all over again? That's really what the whole foresight, insight, action cycle is all about, is taking action and learning from that and then moving forward. So what those steps: welcome, connect, understand, and act. So just leaving that with all of you today. What is it today that you can choose to act upon, and learn from that? So thank you, everyone.
For the encouragement and insight you shared. I'm really excited to have learned more about and to begin the process of futures thinking and what belonging could be in collaboration with our employees, volunteers, clients, and constituents. As we move on to the next portion of our conference, we continue to build on the idea of belonging in the boardroom, in our community, in our operations, and with each other. We are offering 12 breakout sessions throughout the morning, some live and some pre-recorded, and rest assured that though you won't be able to watch all of this morning, all recordings will be available for you for the rest of this year on the platform. The platform is easy to navigate. Check your agenda, and you can pick your breakouts by color-coded tracks, by time, and you can even move between breakout sessions as you'd like. Be sure to connect and share reflections of the breakouts, of the keynote, etc. on the Securing the Future wall within the platform. We will also have an opportunity to visit with our sponsors.